The little girl ran to the crowded school office, wrapped her tiny arms around my waist, and said the words that stopped my entire life. "Dad, where were you?" Every parent in that hallway turned to look at me. Every teacher froze. And I just stood there in silence because I was 32 years old, single, and I had never seen that child before in my life. My name is Ethan Cole. I'm 32 years old. And until that Tuesday afternoon, my biggest concern was whether my software company in Seattle would survive another round of layoffs. I lived alone in a downtown apartment with expensive coffee machines I barely used and a refrigerator full of takeout containers. I had no wife, no children, no idea that a 6-year-old girl with dark curls and trembling hands was about to call me Dad in front of an entire elementary school office. The receptionist looked relieved when the little girl reached me, like a disaster had finally ended, but I could barely breathe. The child held on to my jacket tighter and whispered, "Mom said you would come this time." My stomach dropped so hard, I thought I might collapse right there on the tile floor. Then the principal stepped forward holding a stack of papers and asked quietly, "Mr. Cole, you really don't recognize your daughter?" I stared at the principal like she had spoken another language. "I think there's been a mistake," I said carefully, trying not to scare the little girl still holding onto my arm. "I don't have a daughter." But the principal's expression didn't change. She simply opened the folder in her hands and slid a document across the desk toward me. My full name was printed at the top. Ethan Daniel Cole. Correct birth date. Correct Seattle address. Correct phone number. Under emergency contact, beside the word father, was my name. My chest tightened. The little girl looked up at me with wide, hopeful eyes that somehow already trusted me more than I trusted myself. "You came," she whispered again, like she had been afraid I wouldn't. The office suddenly felt too warm. I asked the principal where the child's mother was. That was when the room went quiet. The counselor, standing near the wall, lowered her eyes before the principal finally answered. "Her mother passed away 3 days ago." The words hit me like cold water. The little girl didn't react, which somehow made it worse. Like she had already cried until there was nothing left inside her. I looked back down at the paperwork, trying to force my brain to understand what was happening. The mother's name was written across the top of the file. Claire Bennett. My heart nearly stopped. I had known Claire 8 years earlier in Chicago during a 6-month relationship that ended suddenly after she disappeared without explanation. One week she was sleeping beside me, laughing at terrible movies and stealing fries off my plate. The next week her apartment was empty and her number disconnected. I searched for her for months before finally convincing myself she simply didn't love me enough to stay. And now a little girl stood beside me clutching my hand, with Claire's exact eyes staring back at me. "Mom said you like pancakes shaped like dinosaurs," the little girl said softly. My knees nearly gave out, because Claire used to make those for me on Sunday mornings. Nobody else knew that. Nobody. The principal asked me to sit down before I fell over, but I couldn't stop staring at the child, at the tiny nervous smile on her face, at the way she kept looking at me like she had waited her entire life for this exact moment. "What's your name?" I finally managed to ask. The girl smiled for the first time since I arrived. "Lucy," she said proudly. "Lucy Cole." Then she tilted her head innocently and asked, "Dad, are you staying this time?" I couldn't answer her right away. My throat closed so tightly it hurt to breathe. The principal quietly explained that Lucy had been sitting in the office for nearly 4 hours because the foster services contact listed by her mother never arrived. Claire had apparently changed Lucy's records months earlier and listed me as the primary emergency guardian. The problem was nobody could reach me because I ignored unknown numbers almost every day. I looked down at Lucy sitting beside me, swinging her small legs under the chair, completely unaware that my entire reality had just shattered apart. "Where have you been?" she asked softly, like it was a normal question children ask their fathers every day. Before I could answer, the office door opened and an older man stormed inside with rage already burning in his face. He stopped the second he saw me. His eyes narrowed instantly. "You," he said coldly. The principal stood up quickly. "Mr. Bennett, please." But he ignored her completely. "After all these years, you finally decide to show up?" The man looked about 65, broad shoulders despite his age, weathered hands, gray beard half trimmed like he'd left home too fast to finish. Lucy immediately ran toward him. "Grandpa!" she cried. He hugged her tightly, but his eyes never left mine. I stood slowly, confused and defensive all at once. "Sir, I didn't even know Lucy existed until an hour ago." His jaw tightened so hard I thought his teeth might crack. "That's funny," he snapped. "Claire spent 7 years believing you abandoned her." The words hit like a punch to the chest. "No," I said immediately. "Claire disappeared. She left Chicago without telling me anything." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. Tiny, barely noticeable, but enough. Lucy looked nervously between us. Sensing the tension she didn't fully understand, the principal quietly suggested we continue somewhere private. But the older man suddenly looked exhausted instead of angry, like grief had drained the fight out of him. He rubbed a shaking hand across his face before speaking again. "Claire left a letter," he said quietly. "For you." Every sound in the room disappeared. "A letter?" He nodded once. "She wrote it before she died. She told me if you ever came for Lucy, I was supposed to give it to you." My pulse thundered inside my ears. Lucy walked back over and slipped her hand into mine naturally, like she'd already decided I belonged to her. Then she looked up at me with those same eyes Claire used to look at me with, and asked a question that broke whatever was left of me inside. "Dad, are you taking me home tonight?" I looked at Lucy's tiny hand, holding mine, and realized something terrifying. She already trusted me completely. A child who had just lost her mother was standing there believing the one person left in her world had finally come back for her. And I had absolutely no idea how to be somebody's father. Claire's father drove us to their farmhouse outside Spokane in complete silence, except for Lucy quietly talking in the back seat about school, her cat named Pepper, and how her mother used to sing while cooking pasta. Every sentence felt like another knife twisting deeper, because I should have known these things years ago. I should have known her favorite color was yellow. I should have known she hated thunderstorms and slept with a stuffed rabbit named Daisy. I should have known my daughter existed. The farmhouse sat at the end of a gravel road surrounded by pine trees and cold evening fog. Inside, the entire house smelled like grief. Half-drunk coffee cups, folded blankets, sympathy flowers already beginning to wilt on the kitchen table. Claire's mother hugged Lucy tightly the second we entered, then froze when she saw me standing behind her husband. Her eyes widened with instant anger. "What is he doing here?" she demanded. But before anyone could answer, Lucy smiled proudly and grabbed my hand again. "Grandma, Dad came." The room fell silent. Claire's mother looked like someone had punched the air from her lungs. Then slowly, painfully, she began to cry. Not loud, not dramatic. Just quiet, broken tears from a woman who suddenly realized she had hated the wrong man for 7 years. Claire's father disappeared upstairs and returned holding a sealed envelope. My name was written across the front in Claire's handwriting. "Ethan." My hands shook taking it from him. "She made me promise," he said quietly. "She said if you came, you deserved the truth." Lucy sat beside me on the couch while I opened the letter. The first sentence nearly destroyed me. "Ethan, if you're reading this, it means I waited too long again." I read every word while the room stayed completely silent around me. Claire confessed everything. She had discovered she was pregnant 2 weeks after leaving Chicago. At first she planned to tell me. Then she panicked. She convinced herself I wasn't ready, that I would resent her, that I deserved freedom instead of responsibility. So she ran. She raised Lucy alone for 7 years while secretly following my life online from a distance. Then 18 months earlier, Claire was diagnosed with terminal ovarian cancer. That was when fear finally became regret. She wrote that she spent the last year preparing Lucy to meet me one day, because deep down she always knew I would come if I knew the truth. Tears blurred the paper so badly I could barely read the final paragraph. "Ethan, Lucy believes heroes always come back in the end. Please don't let my daughter lose both of her parents in the same week." When I finished reading, I realized Lucy had fallen asleep with her head resting against my arm, holding on to me like she was afraid I might disappear if she let go. And in that moment, staring down at my sleeping daughter. I understood something with terrifying clarity. Claire hadn't just left me a letter. She had left me an entire life waiting to be lived. Lucy slept beside me that night in a room filled with drawings she had made for a father she had never met. Crayon pictures of 3 people holding hands under giant yellow suns. Stick figures labeled Mom, me, and Dad. I sat there for hours staring at them while the weight of 7 lost years pressed against my chest. So hard it almost hurt to breathe. Around midnight, Lucy woke briefly from a nightmare and reached for me without even opening her eyes. "Dad," she whispered. "I'm here," I answered immediately. And for the first time in my life, the word felt real. The next months changed everything. I moved from Seattle to Spokane within 6 weeks. I switched my software position to remote work. I bought a small house 10 minutes from Claire's parents because Lucy had already lost too much, and I refused to take away the only family she had left. The legal process moved quickly after the DNA results confirmed what my heart already knew the moment I saw Claire's eyes staring back at me through Lucy's face. 99.99% probability of paternity. But being a father was never about paperwork. It was learning how Lucy liked her pancake shaped. It was sitting beside her bed during thunderstorms because she hated lightning. It was helping her brush tangled curls every morning while she complained I pulled too hard. It was hearing her laugh for the first time 3 months after Claire's funeral and realizing that sound mattered more than every career goal I had ever chased in my entire life. Claire's parents slowly became my family too. Her father apologized one evening while we repaired a fence together behind the farmhouse. He admitted Claire never told him the truth because she was ashamed of what she'd done. I told him grief makes liars out of people sometimes. We both stood there in silence afterward, knowing Claire wasn't alive to defend herself anymore. And maybe she didn't need to be, because despite all her mistakes, she spent the last month of her life making sure Lucy would never be alone. It's been 2 years now. I'm 34. Lucy is 9. Every Friday night we make dinosaur pancakes together, even though she says she's technically too old for them now. Sometimes she still asks questions about Claire before bed. I answer every single one honestly. I tell her mother was stubborn and funny and brave and scared all at the same time. I tell her Claire loved her more than anything that ever existed. And every once in a while, when Lucy falls asleep on the couch beside me holding that same stuffed rabbit from years ago, I think about the little girl who ran across a school office believing her father would come for her. She was right. I just didn't know yet that I had been driving toward her my entire life.